You, 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 you're just a little girl.
Hi guys, good morning. So I am Kathleen M.Pascua, and for today's presentation, I am going to impart with you the rules of Frisbee or Ultimate. So first, let me impart with you what is Frisbee. So Frisbee is a 7-side team sport played with a flying disc. It is played on a rectangular field about half the width of a football field with an end zone at each end. So the objective of each team is to score a goal by having a player catch a pass in the end zone that they are attacking. A thrower may not run with the disc but may pass the disc in any direction to any teammate. So for the rule 1, rule 1 which explains the spirit of the game. So for 1.1, Ultimate is a non-contact, self-officiated sport. All players are responsible for administering and adhering to the rules. Ultimate relies upon a spirit of the game that places the responsibility for fair play on every player. So non-contact tong game na to, which is ang goal lang nito is mapapunta mo yung disc sa teammates mo and then maka-goal kayo. So for the 1.2, it is trusted that no player will intentionally break the rules. Thus, there are no harsh penalties for inadvertent breaches, but rather a method for resuming play in a manner which simulates what would most likely have occurred had there been no breach. So for the 1.3, players should be mindful of the fact that they are acting as referees in any arbitration between teams. So players must know the rules. Be fair-minded and objective. Be truthful. Explain their viewpoint clearly and briefly. Allow opponents a reasonable chance to speak. Consider their opponent's viewpoint. Use respectful words. That is the very most important manner na ginagawa ng mga players not only in Frisbee but for all kinds of sport. With consideration of potential culture differences. Resolve disputes as quickly as possible. Make calls a consistent manner throughout the game and only make a call where a breach is significant enough to make difference to the outcome of the action. So for the 1.4, it explains that highly competitive play is encouraged, but should never sacrifice the mutual respect between players, adherence to the agreed upon rules of the game, players' safety, or the basic joy of the play. So even though play to siya, so hindi din dapat sinasacrifice yung respect sa bawat isa, sa bawat players. Kasi that is only a game. So, napaka-importante pa din yung respect with each other and the safetyness of the players. So, for the 1.5, having a good spirit. So, the players retracting a call when you no longer believe the call was correct. Checking in with an opponent on the sideline after a continuous interaction. Complimenting an opponent for good play or spirit. Introducing yourself to your opponent and reacting calmly towards disagreement or provocation. So during the game or during the play, you have the spirit of a true player or the sportsmanship. So you have to, even though you are magkalaban kayo or opponent mo, but you will consider them as your friends also in that field. So for the 5.6, the following actions are clear violations of the spirit of the game and must be avoided. So dangerous play and aggressive behavior, intentional fouling or other unintentional rule breaches, taunting or intimidating opposing players, celebrating disrespectful after scoring. So halimbawa pag naka-goal kayo and then you act na nakakasama or nakaka-offense sa other team. So that is a violation for being a good spirit or for having the good spirit of the game. So making calls in relation to an opponent's call, calling for a pass from an opposition player, and other win at all cost behavior. So next is for the 1.7, teams are guardians of the spirit of the game and must, always remember this, take responsibility for teaching their players the rules of the game and good spirit. Discipline teammates who display poor spirit. So, team, so kayo ng mga players, na isang team kayo. So, meron talagang iba dyan because you have differences, di ba? May different principles and different behaviors. So, you are responsible enough to discipline your teammates para sa ikakaayos or ikakabuti or para maging productive yung outcome ng game. So, provide constructive feedback to other teams about what they are doing well and on how to provide their adherence to the spirit of the game. Call a spirit stoppage to address spirit issues as appropriate. So, for the 1.8, in the case where a novice player is involved in the breach and does not know the rules, experienced players should assist to explain the breach. So, kapag may baguhan pa lang kayo na players and na-involve siya or may mga nagawa siyang violations and then hindi niya pa masyadong kabisado yung rules. So, as a teammate or as an expert player now with that particular game or for the ultimate or for the Frisbee, you have to assist that novice player. Excuse me. For the 1.9, an experienced player who offers advice on rules and guides on field arbitration may supervise games involving beginners or younger players. So for the 1.10, calls should be discussed by the players directly involved in the play and by players who had the best perspective on the play. So for the 1.11, players and captains are solely responsible for making and resolving all calls. So, as a player and as the captain, you are responsible enough para i-resolve ang mga communication or kung ano man ang mga tatawagin ng umpire. So, for the 1.12, if after discussion players cannot agree, it is not clear and obvious what occurred in a play, what would most likely have occurred in a play, the disc must be returned to the last non-disputed thrower. So, kapag may discussion na naganap and then hindi agree talaga yung mga players, then ang disc is mapupunta or babalik sa last non-disputed thrower. So, let's proceed to the Rule 2, which explains the playing field. So, for the 2.1, the playing field is a rectangular area when dimensions in zones as shown on Figure 1 should be essentially flat, free of obstruction and afford reasonable player safety. So, dapat free of obstruction siya kasi tatakbo kayo kasi habulin niyo yung disc. So, napaka-importante talaga na ang safetyness ng mga players. So for the 2.2, the perimeter lines surround the playing field and consist of 2 sidelines along the length and 2 end lines along the width. So for the 2.3, the perimeter lines are not part of the playing field. So 2.4, the goal lines are the lines that separate the central zone from the end zones and are part of the central zone. So for the 2.5, the brick marks are the intersection of two crossed 1 meter lines in the central zone located a distance equal to the length of the end zone away from each goal line, midway between end sidelines. So for the 2.6, 8 brightly colored flexible objects such as plastic cones mark the corners of the central zone and end zone. So gagamit tayo dito ng plastic cones. Dapat colorful enough siya para makita ng players na that is the central zone or so end zones. So for the 2.7, the immediate surroundings of the playing field shall be kept clear of movable object. If play is obstruction by non-players or object within 3 meters of the perimeter line, any obstructed player in possession may call violation. So if during the play, if may or may mga obstruction or may mga objects na nagpa-cause ng delay or ng delay talaga ng play. So kung sino man yung team or thrower will call a violation. Will be called that they violate the game. So let's proceed to the rule 3, which explains the equipment. So for the 3.1, a flying disc acceptable to both captains may be used. So WFDF may maintain a list of approved disc recommended for use. So hindi tayo basta-basta gagamit ng mga disc dito kasi dapat yung disc na gagamitin is approved by the authorized group or organization. So for the 3.3, each player must wear a uniform that distinguishes their team. So it is very much understandable talaga na dapat kung anong color ng uniform nyo as a team, so dapat uniform kayo. Kasi ay para makilala din kayo or para makilala. Para hindi malito yung mga players kung saan ipapasa yung disc. So for the 3.4, no player may wear items or clothing or equipment that reasonably could harm the wearer or other players. So hindi ka pwedeng magsuot ng mga accessories that could harm your co-players. So for the rule 4, which explains point goal in game. For the 4.1, a game consists of a number of points. Each point ends with the scoring of a goal. So 4.2, a game is finished and won by the first team to score 15 goals. So matatapos na ang game kapag ang team is naka 15 goals na. So for the 4.3, a game is separated into 2 periods of play called halves. Halftime occurs when a team first scores 8. So, bawat half dapat makagol ng 8. So, for the 4.4, the first point of each half starts when the half starts. So, 4.5, after a goal is scored, the game has not been won or halftime has not been reached. The next point starts immediately. The team switch the end zone that they are defending and the team that scored becomes defense and pulls next. So, let's proceed to the rule 5. Teams. So 5.1, each team will put a maximum of 7 players and a minimum of 5 players on the field during each point. So 5.2, each team must designate a captain and a spirit captain to represent the team. So sa team na yan, dapat meron kayong team captain and the spirit team. So dalawa yan siya, spirit captain. So yung spirit captain is ensure niya na talagang walang mga violations or for the so the spirit captain will maintain yung respect ng kanyang teammates. So for the 5.3, a team may make unlimited substitution after a goal is scored and before their team signals readiness for the pool. So unlimited substitution itong larong ito. So for the rule 6, starting off a game, 6.1, representative of the two teams fairly determine which team first chooses either whether to receive or throw the initial pull or which end zone will they initially defend. So for the 6.2, the other team is given the remaining choice. So 6.3, at the start of the second half, these initial selections are switched. So for the rule 7, the pull, 7.1, at the start of the game, after half or after score play commences with the throw by the defense called a pull. Teams must prepare the pull without unreasonable delay. So 7.2, the pull may be made only after both teams have signaled their readiness by having a puller and player on offense raise a hand above their head. So 7.3, after signaling readiness or offensive players must stand with one foot on their defending goal line without changing location relative to one another until the pull is released. So 7.4, after signaling readiness, all defensive players must keep their feet entirely behind the vertical plane of the goal line until the pull is released. So, 7.5, if a team breaches 7.3 or kung nalabag man nila yung sa 7.3 and 7.4, the opposing team may call a violation. So, it is considered that may violation na talaga. So, sa 7.6, as soon as the disc is released, all players may move in any direction. So, ganito lang yan siya. Kapag hindi pa na-release yung disc, so, yung players, kung nasa kayo nakaposition, dapat hindi kayo aalis doon or you will not move. And as soon as the disc released, the players should move to any direction para habulin yung disc. So 7.7, no player on the defensive team may touch the disc after a pull until a member of the offensive team contacts the disc or the disc hits the ground. So for the 7.8, if an offensive player inbounds or outbounds touches the disc before it hits the ground and the offensive team fails to subsequently establish position, that is turnover or a dropped pull. So 7.9, if an offensive player catches the pull and subsequently establishes possession, they must establish a pivot point at the location on the playing field nearest to where possession is established, even if that pivot point is in their defending end zone. So for the 7.10, if the disc initially contacts the playing field and never becomes outbounds, the thrower must establish a pivot point where the disc stops, even if that pivot point is in their defending zone. So for the 7.11, if the disc initially contacts on the playing field and then becomes out of bounds without contacting an offensive player, the thrower must establish a pivot point where the disc first crossed the perimeter line, or the nearest location in the central zone if that point would be in their defending end zone. So for this 7.12, if the disc contacts the out of bounds areas without first touching the playing field or any offensive player, the thrower may establish a pivot point either at the brick mark closest to the defending end zone or at the location on the central zone closest to where the disc went out of bounds. So next rule is Rule 8, which explains the state of the play. So 8.1, play is dead and no turnover if possible after the start of the point until the pull is released. When the disc must be carried to the pivot location after the pull or turnover, after a call which stops the play or any other stoppage until the disc is checked in, after a disc hits the ground until possession is established by the appropriate team, players are allowed to move during that play. So 8.2, play that is not dead is live. 8.3, the thrower may not transfer possession of the disc during that play to another player. 8.4, any player may attempt to stop a disc from rolling or sliding after it has hit the ground. So 8.5, after a turnover and after the pull, an offensive player must move at walking pace to faster to directly retrieve the disc and establish the pivot point. So next rule is Rule 9, which is stall count. So 9.1, the marker administers a stall count on the thrower by announcing stalling and then counting from 1 to 10. The interval between the start of each number in the stall count must at least 1 second. So 9.2, the stall count must be clearly communicated to the thrower. So 9.3, the marker may only start and continue to stall count when play is live or until a pivot is established after the turnover. So 9.4, if the marker moves beyond the appropriate 3-meter radius or a different player becomes the marker, the stall count must be restarted at stalling 1. So after a stoppage in a play, the ball count is resumed as follows. So after an accepted breach of the defense, the stall count restarts at stalling 1. So after an accepted breach by the offense, the stall count starts at maximum 9. So for the 9.6, to restart a stall count at maximum n, where n is determined or means the following. So if x is the last agreed number fully uttered prior to the call, then the stall count resumes at stalling x plus 1 or stalling n, whichever of those two numbers is lower. So next is rule number 10, the check. Whenever play stops during a point for a foul, violation, contested turnover, specified turnover, consistent goal, stoppage, discussion, or at the completion of a timeout, play must restart as quickly as possible with a check. So 10.2, player positioning after a call. So if play stops before a pass is thrown, all players must return to the location where they held the call was made. So 10.3, any player may briefly extend the stoppage to play to fix faulty equipment, but active play may not be stopped for this purpose. So pwedeng ma-stop yung play kapag may aayusin ng mga equipment, kasi kung may sira kasing equipment inside the playing field, so may possibility na it may result to some chaos or injury. So 10.4, prior to the check, the person checking the disc in, the nearest opposition player must verify that their own teammates are ready. So before to start the game, the players must be ready enough. So 10.5, if there is an unnecessary delay in checking the disc in, the opposition may give warning. If the delay continues, the team that have the warning may check the disc in by calling disc in without verification from the opposition, but only if the team checking the disc in all stationary and positioned. So kailangan talaga ipa-check yung disc ng bawat team. So 10.6, to restart play with a check when the thrower has the disc, if there is a defender within reach, if there is not a defender within the reach. So 10.7, a player may call a violation regarding the check if an opponent attempt to pass without an appropriate check, restart play without verification from the nearest opposition player, moving immediately prior to the check, was not in the appropriate position, and after this violation call, any pass does not count regardless of whether it is complete or incomplete. So, Rule 11, out of bounds. So, 11.1, the entire playing field is inbound. The perimeter line are not part of the playing field and are out of bounds. All non-players are part of the non-of-bounds area. So, kung hindi ka player, you will position in the out-of-bound area. So, 11.12, the out-of-bounds area consists of the ground which is not inbound and everything in contact with it except for defensive players, who are always considered inbounds. 11.3, an offensive player who is not out of bounds is inbounds. So 11.4, the following are out of bounds turnover and no catch is deemed to have occurred. Any part of an offensive receiver is out of bounds when they contact the disc. After catching the disc while airborne, an offensive receiver's first contact is out of bounds while still in contact with the disc. So 11.5, a disc is in inbound once play is live or when a play starts. So 11.16, a disc becomes out of bounds when it first contacts the out of bounds area or contact out of bounds offensive player. So 11.7, the disc may fly outside the perimeter line and return to the playing field, and players may go out of bounds to make play on the disc. So 11.8, the place where a disc went out of bounds is the location where prior to contacting an out of bounds area or player. So 11.9, if the disc is out of bounds more than 3 meters from the pivot location, non-players may retrieve the disc. Next is Rule 12, which explains receivers and positioning. So 12.1, a catch occurs when a player has a non-spinning disc trapped between at least two body parts. So 12.2, after establishing possession, that player becomes thrower. So 12.3, if offensive and defensive player catch the disc simultaneously, the offense retains possession. So 12.4, a player in an established position is entitled to remain in that position and must not be contacted by an opposing player. 12.5, if player is entitled to occupy any position on the field not occupied by any opposing player, provided that they do not initiate contact in taking such possession. So 12.6, all players must attempt to avoid contact with other players, and there is no situation where a player must justify initiating contact. So hindi ka dapat magdikit sa kalaban or sa opponent mo. So 12.7, the player who initiates contact is deemed to be the player. So 12.8, some minor contact may occur as two or more players move towards a single point simultaneously. Minor contact should be minimized but as is not considered foul. So hindi talaga maiiwasan na may mga contact na konti, lalo na iisa yung direction na pupuntahan ninyo or iisa yung point na pupuntahan ninyo. So this is not considered as a foul because konti lang yung contact na nagawa ninyo. So 12.9, players may not use their arms or legs to obstruct the movement of opposing players. So, pinagbabawal talaga na gagamit ka ng kamay or legs mo to your opponent. So, 12.10, no player may physically assist the movement of another player, nor use an item or equipment or object to assist the contacting the disc. So, hindi ka pwedeng gumamit ng kahit na anumang object para matulungan mo yung disc na mapunta sa kasama mo. So, Rule 13, turnovers. 13.1, a turnover that transfer possession of the disc from one team to another. So, 13.2, a turnover that transfers possession of the disc from one team to another and results in a stoppage of the play. So, 13.3, if a player determines a turnover has occurred, they must make the appropriate call immediately. If the opposition disagrees, they may call contest and play must stop. So 13.4, after a stall out call, if the thrower still has possession of the disc, but they believe a fast count occurred in such a manner that they did not have reasonable opportunity. So 13.5, if any offensive player may take possession of the disc after a turnover. So after an interception, turnover, in which case the player who made the interception must maintain possession. So 13.6, if a player in the possession after a turnover or after a pull that has already hit the ground intentionally drops the disc or place the disc on the ground or transfer possession of the disc, they must re-establish possession and restart the play with a check. So kapag i-place mo yung disc sa ground, so it is understandable talaga na mag-restart talaga yung game. So 13.7, after a turnover, the turnover location is where the disc has come to stop or picked by an offensive player. The 13.8, if the turnover location is out of bounds or the disc touch an out of bounds area where the turnover occurred, the thrower must establish a pivot point at the location. 13.9, if the turnover location is in the central zone, the thrower must establish a pivot point at that location. 13.10, if the turnover location is in the offense's attacking end zone, the thrower must establish a pivot point at the nearest location on the goal line. So 13.11, if the turnover is in the offense's defending end zone, the thrower may choose where to establish a pivot point. So 13.12, if or after an accepted turnover, play has continued unknowingly, play stops and the disc is returned to the turnover location. Players resume their position at the end or at the time the turnover occurred and play restart with a check. So for the Rule 14, scoring, 14.1, a goal is scored if an inbound player catches the legal pass. So makaka-score kapag na-catch mo yung disc. 14.2, if a player believes a goal has been scored, they may call goal and play stops. So 14.3, if a player in possession of the disc ends up with their selected pivot point behind the attacking goal line without scoring a goal according to 14.1, the player must establish a pivot point at the nearest location on the goal line. 14.4, the time at which a goal is deemed to have been scored is when the player established possession. So Rule 15, calling fouls, infractions, and violations. So 15.1, a breach of the rules due to non-minor contact between two or more opposing players is a foul. 15.2, regarding to mark, so a breach of the rules is regarding to a marking or travel breach is an infraction. 15.3 Every other breach of the rules is a violation. So 15.4 Only the player fouled may claim a foul by calling foul. So kung naka-foul ka or aminado ka na na-foul ka, you may raise some voice and you may call it a foul. 15.5 In general, only the thrower may claim in an infraction by calling the specific name of the infraction. So 15.6 Opposing player may claim violation. So 15.7 When a foul or violation call is made that stops play, player must stop play by visibly or audibly communicating the stoppage as soon as they are aware of the call, and all players should echo calls on the field. So 15.8 Calls must be made immediately after the breach is recognized. 15.9 After a player initiates a stoppage incorrectly, including after mishearing a call, not knowing the rules, or not making the call immediately. So 15.10 If the player against whom the foul, infraction, or violation has been called disagrees that is occurred or does not think it is a correct call, they may call contest. So kapag tinawag ka na naka-violate ka and then wala ka naman talagang na-violate, alam mo sa sarili mo na wala kang na-violate, you may call it a contest. So 15.11 If a player making any call subsequently determines that their call was incorrect, they can retract the call by calling retracted. 15.12 If multiple breaches occur in the same play or before play stops, the outcomes should be resolved in the reverse sequence. So 15.3 Players are encouraged to use the WFDF hand signals to communicate all calls. So for Rule 16, continuation after a call. 16.1 Whenever a foul or violation call is made, a player attempts to stop play in any way, play stops immediately and no turnover is if possible. 16.2 If a foul or violation is called against the thrower and the thrower attempts a pass or called by the thrower during the act of throwing, so 16.3 Regardless of when any call is made, if the player involved from both teams agree that the event or call did not affect the outcome, the play stands. So for the Rule 17 fouls, so for the Rule 17, which explains the fouls. So for the 17.1 dangerous play, so actions demonstrating reckless disregard for the safety of fellow players or posing significant risk of injury to fellow players or other dangerously aggressive behaviors are considered dangerously play and must be treated as foul. So 17.2 Receiving fouls. A receiving foul occurs when a player initiates non-minor contact with an opponent before, while, or directly after either player make a play on the disc. So 17.3 Strip fouls. It will occur when an opponent foul a player that causes the player to drop the disc they caught or to lose possession of the disc. So 17.4 Blocking fouls. A blocking foul occurs when a player takes a position that an opponent moving in an illegal manner will be unable to avoid. 17.5 Force out fouls occurs when a receiver is in the process of establishing possession of the disc and is fouled by a defensive player before establishing position. 17.6 Defensive throwing. It will occur when a defensive player is illegally positioned and there is non-minor contact between illegally positioned defensive player and the thrower. So, for the 17.7, offensive throwing thrower fouls. So, occurs when the thrower is solely responsible for initiating non-minor contact with a defensive player who is in illegal position. So 17.8 Indirect fouls occurs when there is non-minor contact between a receiver and a defensive player. So 17.9 Offsetting fouls. If accepted fouls are called by offensive and defensive players on the same play, these are offsetting fouls and the disc must be returned to the last non-disputed thrower. So, sa Rule 18, infractions and violations. So, 18.1, marking infractions. So, this includes fast counts, straddle, disc space, wrapping, double team, vision. So, sa next is 18.2, travel infractions. The thrower may attempt to pass at any time as long as they are entirely inbounds or have established an inbounds pivot point. So, 18.3, peak violations. If a defensive player is guarding one offensive player and they are prevented from moving towards with the player by another player. So, next is Rule 19, safety stoppages. So, 19.1, injury stoppage. It may be called by any injured player or by any player on the injured player's team. So, 19.2, technical stoppage. If any player who recognizes a condition that endangers players, including if a player has an open or bleeding wound, should call a technical stoppage by calling technical or stop. So, 19.3, if a player is substituted after an injury or due to illegal or faulty equipment, the opposing team may also choose to substitute one player. So, for the Rule 20, timeouts, 20.1, the player calling a timeout must form T with their hands. This will signal timeout. Or with one hand and the disc, and should call a timeout to the opposition players. So, 20.2, after the start of a point and before both teams have signaled readiness, a player from either team may call a timeout. For 20.3, after the pull, only a thrower with possession of the disc may call a timeout. 20.4, if the thrower attempts to call a timeout while play is live and when their team has no remaining timeouts, play is stopped. So that's ends for this presentation. I do hope na may na-learn kayo about the Frisbee and about the rules of Frisbee. So thank you for listening.